Alberta and Ottawa are restarting talks about a possible new oil pipeline to Canada's west coast. The federal government and Alberta have signed an agreement meant to open the door for a pipeline that would carry oil from Alberta across British Columbia to Canada's Pacific coast. Canada's Energy Minister will brief BC Liberal MPs today about the deal the government expects to make with Alberta. The Prime Minister has already said a pipeline deal to the west coast is on the table. This kind of shift rarely comes quietly. It usually starts with one comment, but it can change everything. That's exactly what Alberta's announcement did. It shook up governments, investors, refineries, and global markets all at once. A province that many people thought of as dependable suddenly showed it holds far more power within North America's energy system than most realized. The reaction was fast. As soon as the news hit Washington, the question became unavoidable. What if the supplier that powers much of America's energy, the one delivering about 2 million barrels of oil a day, decided to send that oil elsewhere? Alberta's statement carried real weight and challenged long-standing assumptions. Danielle Smith, the provincial leader, said Alberta could redirect a large share of its oil to foreign buyers if the U.S. tried to pressure Canada with tariffs. That message landed hard because it exposed the foundation of a relationship the United States seldom questioned. For decades, American officials treated Canadian energy as a reliable, permanent supply. Alberta just proved that's no longer a guarantee. Then trade tensions entered the picture. The current U.S. administration has been vocal about cutting the trade deficit with Canada, much of which stems from energy imports. In response, Premier Smith pointed out plainly that the barrels heading south every day are exactly what Washington claims they want less of. Her tone was confident, and her numbers backed her up. That confidence matters because of the scale. Alberta's oil output isn't a small side note. It provides roughly a quarter of the fuel America uses. Major refineries in Ohio and Pennsylvania rely almost entirely on Canadian heavy crude. Without it, those refineries would struggle, disrupting entire supply chains and sending shockwaves through the Midwest economy. Canada is among the world's largest oil and gas producers, and most of that, about 97% of Canada's exported oil, goes to the U.S. In total, roughly 60% of all oil and gas entering the U.S. comes from Canadian sources. Because of this heavy reliance, tariffs on Canadian crude have always been treated with caution. Heavy oil from Alberta has never been a major target, and analysts believe Washington knows why. A 25% tariff, for example, could raise Midwest gasoline prices by about $1 per gallon, a spike consumers would feel long before any policy debate ends. Pressure doesn't come only from Alberta. Another Canadian province reminded the U.S. that Canada supplies up to 85% of the electricity in certain American regions during peak demand periods. These energy flows have always been treated as reliable, but now it is clear nothing is guaranteed. As one Canadian official bluntly put it, Alberta holds the ultimate leverage, the power to approve an export tax if needed. That may have sounded theoretical, but the message wasn't. The U.S. benefits from Canadian energy access. Any move to disrupt that trade would hit American consumers hardest. Now we're facing a bigger question about North American energy relations. If just one province can shake Washington with a single statement, maybe the old balance of power, one that many assumed was steady for decades, no longer matches reality. Once Alberta's message reached Washington, things began moving fast. Rather than pressuring Canada, the tariff threat started spreading uncertainty in the U.S. Canada supplies more than 60% of American crude imports, a flow that underpins the entire U.S. energy sector. While the U.S. produces plenty of oil, much of it is light crude that doesn't match the requirements of many American refineries. Those facilities are built for heavy oil, mostly from Canada. That hits the Midwest especially hard. Refineries in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania have few good alternatives. According to studies from early 2025, if Canadian heavy crude were disrupted, some refineries could begin struggling within weeks. Operations would slow, maintenance would be disrupted, and fuel prices would rise. Energy companies across the U.S. are watching nervously. Tariff talks create instability, and when policy direction can change quickly, companies grow hesitant to commit to long-term plans. This caution highlights a deeper weakness in the U.S. energy system. When a major supplier becomes uncertain, everything from refinery operations to fuel transport routes becomes fragile. Analysts note that even a 10% tariff from the US could push Canada to adjust its pricing slightly, but the result would still hurt US energy security. In that scenario, both countries would lose, but the US would have fewer fallback options. This change in dynamic ties into what Canada is doing next. Canada is actively shifting toward energy sources the US can't easily influence. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, is now central to Canada's long-term plan. The goal, diversify so Canada isn't overly dependent on one trading partner. Today, LNG from Canada is heading into global markets, not just the US. The momentum is already real. LNG Canada Phase 1, based in Kitimat, began exporting in mid-2025, adding roughly 14 million tons per year to global supply. Geography works in Canada's favor. Pacific Coast shipments reach key Asian markets in about 11 days, with shipping costs well under $1 per metric ton. By contrast, many U.S. shipments take nearly 24 days and go through the Panama Canal, costing more and taking longer. That makes Canadian LNG a symbol of economic independence. Canadian leaders now view this sector as a path to reduce reliance on a single export destination. How far will this go? That depends on global prices and demand. But the direction is clear. Canada is positioning itself to compete on the world stage, locking in long-term LNG contracts with buyers in Asia and Europe. Because of this shift, investment patterns are changing fast. As U.S. energy companies hesitate, worried about tariffs and unpredictable policy, Canada is seeing one of the biggest waves of LNG investment in its history. A major part of this surge is LNG Canada Phase 2, a plan to nearly double capacity to around 28 million tons per year. If all goes well, it could attract nearly $33 billion in private capital, backed by strong demand from Asia and Europe. Another large project, Quesnel LNG, is moving quickly through approvals. Designed as a floating facility, it could draw around $30 billion in investment, with one of the fastest regulatory timelines ever seen for a Canadian energy project. The government's Major Projects Office is coordinating these efforts to speed up approvals, reduce delays, and give investors a stable, predictable environment. This growing stability is helping Canada climb toward being one of the world's top 5 LNG exporters. It's part of a broader shift in thinking. Canada is no longer comfortable relying almost entirely on a single buyer. As recently as 2023, nearly all Canadian crude exports went to the US. That level of concentration limited Canada's negotiating power and flexibility. But things changed. Statements from leaders in early 2025 made it clear. Canada will no longer assume that the U.S. trade relationship is guaranteed. Instead, Canada sees global markets, especially in Asia and Europe, as major buyers. Asian and European buyers have responded with interest, drawn by lower shipping costs and faster delivery times than many U.S. alternatives offer. What does that mean going forward? A long-term strategy is emerging. Canada plans to gradually reduce dependence on the U.S. and build more diverse trade partnerships. The timing depends on infrastructure growth and changing demand, but the direction is undeniable. With more buyers and stronger infrastructure, Canada gains flexibility. That makes tariff threats from Washington far less effective than they once were. American refineries, largely in the Midwest, still rely heavily on Canadian heavy crude. There's no easy substitute. Raising prices or restricting imports now hurts U.S. consumers more than Washington's political leverage. Meanwhile, Canada's expanding LNG sector reinforces the country's new options. Faster shipment routes to Asia, long-term contracts, and a clear investment boom are reshaping the energy landscape. The influence is no longer one way. Tariffs, once a tool for pressure, now reveal weaknesses in the U.S. energy structure. Many companies are rethinking contracts and where they get supply. When uncertainty rises, firms become more cautious about long-term commitments. Ultimately, it is clear, a single province like Alberta can change the conversation, because those oil barrels flowing south aren't optional. They matter. They shape how everyday life in the U.S. runs. Canada is no longer just a backup supplier. It's becoming a global competitor. With these shifts gaining speed, the future of North American energy looks very different. Decisions being made now will influence the next decade of trade, investment, and policy. The relationship between Canada and the U.S. is entering a new era, one based on give and take instead of old expectations. Alberta's warning exposed that clearly, and the ripple effects are still spreading outward. What do you think about all this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Catch you next time.